Okay. Yeah. The question is, what significant changes or a little bit of history about the Yates and Wheatley Classic that one time had over 60,000 participants or fans at games and the parade, etc., and the progress that we've made since then.
Well, there were three high schools at that time: Washington, Wheatley, and Yates. Washington, somehow being in Fourth Ward, the big Thanksgiving Day game was between Wheatley and Yates, and the old high school stadium was full. Now, in those days, the white schools had their games at high school stadium during the week. We played ours basically on Thursdays. But the main weekdays were for the white schools over at the old um, high school stadium
Jefferson,
between on
was it Jefferson Stadium or Robinson Stadium?
yes. It later became of when University of Houston was established. It was changed primarily for University of Houston to play their games there. In fact, when the Houston Oilers started their professional team, their first games before the bigger stadiums were built, or the Astrodome was built, they played their games right there in Third Ward at the old high school stadium.
Right. I remember that. We used to be playing football in the vacant lot there
Mm-hmm.
on Ruth, and we would hear that cannon go off over there at the stadium whenever the Oilers would make a touchdown.
Now, there were enterprising people who lived on Scott in that area. And over here, as far as Ruth, close to Scott, they were enterprising. They would allow people going to the games to park in their yards
Okay.
and charge them for parking in their yards. If you had a good sized yard, you'd get three or four cars
Right,
in your yard.
right, right. Now, you're old enough at the time to remember when they first built Canfield Oaks. There was nothing but woods, as I recall, down at the end of Canfield going towards Scott
That's right.
and then on towards Scott toward Cullen.
Yes.
All woods.
Yes.
Can you remember any of that?
Yes, very well. The At that time, Tier Wester did not run all the way through from Wheeler over to Southmore. And we used to walk through there because there was no street there. Then they enlarged or actually extended Tier Wester from Wheeler all the way through uh, Ruth and the other streets on across Tier Wester onto the other streets along there and extended all the way over to South McGregor,
Okay, Wentworth, Arbor, Rosedale,
Rosedale.
Wichita.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Uh, let's see. What else can I ask you? You're a military man. I know that. So
Yes.
you did serve your time in the military.
3 years, 1959 to 1962.
Right. Wow.
Serving 18 months over in Korea. The
Okay.
war was over.
Okay.
I was too young for Korea, too old for Vietnam. So my service was in a peaceful time.
Right. And how many languages do you speak,
I
Billy?
studied five, working for the State Department in the Foreign Service. If you went to a school, I'm sorry, if you went to a country, you were sent to a country where English was not the primary language there, then you had to study the language of that country. And there were three types. There were the easier ones, such as French, Spanish, German, and so forth. Those were the easy languages. But there was one language over in the Far East, Indonesian, would fall into that. And that was studying for 6 months. It wasn't like in college where you would go to 3 days a week, an hour a day. That was our job, but that was your job at that time. You studied 5 days a week, 6 hours a day. Now, for some language, which were in the middle difficulty, we'll say, for Westerners, such as Greek, Vietnamese, Thai, and several others, they were 9 months. Again, 5 days a week, 6 hours a day. But the difficult language for Westerners were Arabic, Japanese, Chinese, and Korean. That was 2 years.
Wow.
Again,
Now
five
which
days a week, 6 hours a day for 2 years.
which of those languages do you speak?
Korean
Okay.
was the first one that I studied. In fact, it reminds me, I never knew, but in high school, in those days, in Houston, they had French, Spanish, and Latin. And I took Latin because I thought perhaps I would go to medical school. So
Okay.
I studied language in high school, 2 years. And in college at Fisk, I studied French for 3 years. So it became apparent to me that I had a pretty good knack for languages. So Korean was the first one that I studied. That was for a full year, as I said, 5 days a week, 6 hours a day. I'm sorry, for 2 years, not 1 year, for 2 years. And then in the 9-month category, I studied Vietnamese and Thai. And they were 9 months each. Again, 5 days a week, 6 hours a day. And in the easier category, the only easier category for the ones in the Far East was Indonesian and Malay. They were as close as English, British English and American English. So in that, I studied Indonesian and which was the same thing as Malay. So it was actually 4 languages, not 5, only
Okay.
4. Korean, Vietnamese, Thai, and Indonesian.
Right. Trying to think what other questions I might have for you.
Now I mentioned, getting back to the languages,
Okay.
Korean had a peculiarity about it. The verbs always came at the end of the sentence. So you go all through the sentence and get to the verb at the end to know whether it was present tense, past tense, future tense. But you
Wow.
know everything up to that point, and that would determine which tense it was, present, past, or future. Now in Thai was difficult because there were no breaks in sentences. You would have to know everything that you were saying to know that you had completed a sentence. And the verbs could be within the sentence somewhere, unlike Korean where they're always at the end of a sentence. So when you got to the verb, you knew that was the end of a sentence. But Thai was quite difficult because of that aspect.
Right. It seems, just as a person who knows very little about languages, period, it seems like that Thai language would be something that you would definitely have to pick up at a child age to get the really b- way to speak it.
Well, because it was taught at such a level that, of course, if you were younger, you could. But we were adults, all adults work in the Foreign Service, so no, we didn't have any, because they were all the languages were taught by natives of that country.
Okay.
So you have to learn to read, write, and speak those languages, whether it be French, Spanish, German, Japanese, Korean, Thai, Vietnamese, or Arabic. It was the same thing. You were to
Now,
learn to read, write, and speak.
are any of those languages interwound with Chinese?
Written before, once upon a time, when the Koreans were speaking Korean, it all was written in Chinese until about 1450 something. The King Sejong there, he told his scholars, look, we are Koreans, we're not Chinese. You come up with a written language.
Wow.
It may be written either way, whether it's written in Korean or in Chinese, but we want our own language. So a lot of Korean, over half of Korean, can be written in Chinese. And if you are educated in Korea, even these days, you are able to read a newspaper. You have to learn about 2,000, between 2,000 and 2,500 Chinese characters to read the newspaper. Now, when North Korea existed under a communist regime, they stopped using Chinese. They said, look, we're Koreans, we don't need this Chinese. So in North Korea, they never taught Chinese, whereas in South Korea, they did to read the newspaper. But all the newspapers and books were printed in North Korea in native Korean.
Okay. Well, we've got about 4 more minutes of time on this device. I want to just say something about your mom. She very known in the city, and she's good to so many people. And I know I read somewhere she taught at Yates, Washington.
Started teaching in Washington, and in 1947, in schools, high schools in Houston, they started having registrar.
And this
And
is
she
Mary
was
Collins.
Yes.
Okay.
She was the first registrar at Booker T. Washington. Those schools that only had 3, Washington, Reed, and Yates, each one had a registrar. The 3 of them knew each other. And then after that, she continued to be a registrar at Washington until Cashmere Garden School was opened over in the Cashmere Gardens area. And she was a registrar there. And after that, integration came, and she was a registrar at Sharpstown High School. And then she got a chance to go into the personnel department with the HISD, and she worked in personnel until she retired about 1977.
Right. And then I know she volunteered for many years over at MD Anderson.
MD Anderson.
Yeah,
yes.
and she just helped so many people. A lot of people really know your mother, and always talk about the fantastic person that she was. And it's just really I appreciate you taking the time to give us a little of history of Houston as you saw it, and as you've seen it growing up, and just telling us about some of your experiences. Is there anything else you'd like to share at this time?
There are 2 things I'd like to share. One is, how did I go to Fisk University? Well, my mother was a graduate of Fisk University, and she was an AKA, and all she talked about for her college life, going to Fisk and being an AKA.
Right.
My not knowing, I thought going to college meant go to Fisk and be an AKA. Well, obviously, I didn't qualify for an AKA. Second thing is, a friend of mine here, about the same age anyway, once when integration came to the Third Ward area, she said, and it was her, she said, they'll be back. And I said, no way. Her name was Clara Como. I said, Clara, they won't be back. And lo and behold, she's dead now. I could not tell her that she was right. But she foresaw the fact that the whites had come, and eventually, when it became more integrated, they would come back. And they have come back.
Wow. Now, tell me this other thing. I know you were able to give Felicia Rashad a poem book that her mom put together.
Yes.
And we've got maybe 2 minutes. Can you tell me something about Mrs.
Allen.
Yes.
Yes, her husband, Dr. Andrew A. Tex Allen. And when she came, there was a group of African American women here. Most of them were doctors' wives, called the Swartzett Club. And they decided when Mrs. Allen came that they would get her into the club. And she was also, she wrote poetry. And my mother, she gave one to my mother. And Felicia
one of her
was here
books.
maybe about one of her poetry books. Felicia was here maybe two or 3 years ago. And I remember her and her sister, Debbie Allen, when they were little kids. Their father, Dr. Allen, was my dentist. But anyway, I decided that I no longer needed this book of poetry by Felicia and Debbie's mother. So I went over to Jack Eats and gave it to her. She had didn't have a copy, was not aware of it, but she was very surprised and said, "Oh, that's my mother."
Okay, well, it looks like we've got about